Let me recognize that my problems have been solved. I'm going to talk about myself and my problems for a minute, and not because I'm important or more or less valuable than anyone else, but it's just a case study. So I've had psoriasis, which is a skin condition which is kind of itchy and difficult, and I've had it for 30 years. And I've gone to India to study yoga for 10 years. For 1 month, I did an intense retreat and it disappeared with lots of pranayama and yoga practice. But I never was able to achieve that again without just like doing yoga all day, every day for a month, which was obviously not practical. Um, Physical yoga and pranayama, breath work. And I've healed it through fasting for 14 days. And recently I went on a ketogenic diet, and then I moved from what's called Dr. Gundry's plant paradox diet, the strict version of that, to the lion diet. So I just eat ruminant meat, I just eat beef, or sheep or lamb or anything with more than one stomach. And they have a lot of, and I eat a high percentage of fat. And slowly it's healing. When I came off the fast, it came back much worse. And so that's been a lot, that's like a minute and a half's condensation of like this really long journey to handling a serious physical condition. And I've been on those diets for almost 5 months now, and I would say my condition is 70% better, and the last 30% I imagine will be quite slow to heal. And let me recognize that my problems have been solved. Well, my skin isn't healed. It's taken 30 years to find a solution that works, that I can live with, that isn't unattainable. And the doctors just treat the symptoms. Like, if you have a skin condition like that, they'll give you steroids, which impairs your immune system, and they don't understand it. But basically, psoriasis is a problem of the gut. So if you eat lectins and oxalates and things which we find in a lot of foods, and also all the toxic foods that you associate with like modern industrial economy, like maltodextrin, high corn, fructose, and high corn. I can't remember the name of it, but it's this sugar that if you walk around in American supermarkets, just almost ubiquitous, and it's like these things are really bad for you. And then the seed oils and things, like they're just not good for the health. And then soda pop and things like that, and aspartame and the fake sugars that are industrially produced make huge profits, but also cause lots of physical health issues. And so if you eradicate those from your diet, and you find a way to just sort of eat whole foods that are organic, hopefully, and don't have antibiotics in them to pump up the animal's size, and they're not grain fed, like they've evolved on grass, so they don't have the microbiome to handle that, although it makes them very big. You find a solution, right? But let me recognize my problems have been solved. Now, this is lesson 80 in the Course in Miracles, and almost certainly you won't meet a human being, almost the majority of human beings, that don't have problems. We all do. So it seems like a very arrogant statement to read this, but it's asking something. There's an implicit question in here. Can you shift your perception to recognize something else that's going on? And there's another lesson in the Course in Miracles that says, I can but injure myself, which is very similar to what the myth of Job is about, because at the end of the story, God says to Job, like, well, you're doing this to yourself, or you're upset and so forth. Now, if someone gets raped, they don't do that to themselves. If someone gets abused, they're not doing that to themselves. But what the lesson means is that If you take a line of spaghetti, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's what time is like, as our linear understanding of it is. But from a different perspective, if you turn the spaghetti around, it just has a single point. And if we are able to transcend our body's identity and our mind's victim thoughts, there's an idea that is at the center of the Course in Miracles teachings that says, you believe that it was possible to destroy your innate essence. And your innate essence is not based on insecurity and fear, but the belief that you can do that is based on insecurity and fear. And so what "let me recognize that my problems have been solved" means is that when you are beginning to have this heart opening where the defense and attack mechanisms of the world are not given authority in your mind, nor does the body identity seem to define you. And this, I would say, is just as long a process as my journey to healing with psoriasis. Maybe some people get it in a flash, but I think it's usually quite a slow, protracted process where you start to question your identity and you have inner experiences that support that questioning process. But what it means is that from the point of view of time, like, there's all kinds of problems, and the identity that I occupy in my consciousness, there's all kinds of problems. There's the problems of age, there's the problems of money and sustaining oneself with moral dignity. There's the problems of relationships and the things that get mirrored and the aggression and upset that come up in relationships. There's the problems of how we manage our ecology, how we produce fuel. There's the problems of political borders. There's the problem of health conditions. There's the problem of legal disputes. There's the problem of wrongful use of the law. There's the problem of enforcing the law in a way that's appropriate. There's a problem of, mafias and economic cabals. And there's a problem of corruption. There's just endless problems in the world. But the Course in Miracles is inviting us to disassociate from the identity with the world. Jesus was crucified, right? But he's on the cross and he's saying, well, that's you can't destroy what I am. You can kill the body that I'm identified with by others, but I don't anymore identify with that because I know that the body is a projection of the mind. And so this maturity starts to emerge, and this is the essential mythological journey, the journey from babe to child to adolescence to man or woman, and then the psycho-spiritual transformation into the awareness that I'm spirit. And this, from the point of view of materialistic science, is so alien. This is not something that will ever become a mass movement, and it's impossible because and stupid to try and make moves in that direction, because enlightenment only happens in the individual, and there is a process of learning that's going on in every individual that may take eons to mature, because what's most important, this is a theory in the Course in Miracles, whether it's true or not is depending on your interpretation of what's going on, and that's relativistic. But what it says is that the mind projects the body into form, and a mind can't project a body into form without an ego. And the ego is like the shadow of fear that believes us and the separated reality to be real, itself to be real. And it's very frightening to look in the mirror, which reveals its insubstantialness. And that mirror is spiritual inquiry. And so, just like the spaghetti, which seems to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, this one-pointed nature of the unified mind that transcends the ego thought system says that there's only love, there's nothing that can be threatened, there's nothing that that is real which can be threatened, right? So what is real can't be threatened. So all kinds of atrocities in the name of political dictators and family domestic abuse can go on, but just like a temper tantrum of a toddler, one has to recognize that that is the movement of an aspect of the mind that hasn't matured to know its true nature yet. And on realizing its true nature, on developing a relationship with that true nature, the problems that we associate with our identity start to be questioned, and they start to lose their validity. I'm not saying that your debts just go away. I'm saying that the identity with the sorrow that goes with the problems that we have to handle every day in the world, the sorrow, the grief, the wrath, the upset, and the Enneagram, which is the oldest personality model we have, it looks at these different sins or misperceptions, right? And there's 9 of them. The first one is pride before the fall from grace. That's the second Enneatype. And that's the first one in terms of the mythological structure, but in terms of the 9 in line, it's 1 is wrath, 2 is pride, 3 is vanity, 4 is envy, 5 is greed, 6 is fear, 7 is gluttony, 8 is lust, and 9 is laziness. Now, all of these are not necessarily to be taken literally. They're all based on fear, and they all stem from the idea that I'm not good enough, and I see that reflected in others with all my judgments. And so I envy people that have things I don't have or seem more important than I am, and I am prideful about who I think myself to be. I'm vain about my achievements. I'm angry when people don't live up to my standards. I don't. I'm greedy when I don't feel I have enough experience of things or life experiences. I'm fearful when I'm put in front of a crowd and have to do public speaking, or I'm fearful of being exposed for some treachery that I can't quite understand in myself, or I'm fearful of the world and its corruption and its insanity, or I'm gluttonous for more experiences or more privilege or variety or importance, so my appetite is never satisfied. There's a difference between gluttony and greed, because greed is coming from a place of amassing information, knowledge, or experiences or money, whereas gluttony is the appetite for more. They seem very similar, but there are nuanced differences, because greed as a personality type tends to show up as interest in information, whereas gluttony is more related to appetites and keeping things light and not looking at the dark side of the psyche so you can heal it, which often leads to manic bipolar and different psychological issues. And then there's lust, and lust again, like greed, gluttony, and lust have a lot in common, because they're all coming from this place of not enough. All the personalities come from the sense of I'm not enough, but greed, gluttony, and lust all come from the sense of not enough in terms of experience. And often the lustful personality, and it's got nothing necessarily to do with sexual lust, but it's for experiences of life, like the gluttonous personality, but slightly different inflection. Often those people are very aggressive, and they're very direct and concise, but they have this dark side that is aggressive. And then laziness, often they're like the uncle in the Hawaiian shirt that everyone's fond of, and he's there to solve everyone's problems, but he won't look at his own issues. So these are the inflections of misperception, and we hide behind those masks, and wherever you go on the planet you see those masks. They exist everywhere. There's actually sort of 10 in a way, because fear is split between the person who jumps out of airplanes to prove he's not afraid of heights, and that's kind of this arrogant fearful nature, which tries to disprove to himself his fears when he needs to just look at them and discount them rather than be this macho character. And then the other fear is just like a much shyer, self-introverted character. That none of these personalities are to be condemned, right? In fact, one has to meet people. If you read about Carl Jung's life as a psychotherapist, he would take on totally different personalities when he was handling different patients, because this prism of different personalities would require different approaches in sensitivity. There's no like cookie cutter one problem fixes all, except in this meta teaching of the Course in Miracles that says, I'm never upset for the reason I think, and let me recognize that all my problems that cause all my upset have been solved, right? And so that's coming to the situation as if you're this dot that has transcended time and space, and you're looking above the battleground of the misuse of time, and you're seeing time used in the right way, where it's handed over, surrendered to a deeper wisdom. And in that wisdom, all your pain, all your unconscious suffering that is yet to come up has been solved by the recognition of trust in life, of trust in the fact that this deeper understanding of the metaphysics of reality, that there's an attack on what can't be threatened, and there's a defense of that attack repeated endlessly to support like the illusion that I am this body. And it's this strange miasma of the ego that wants to protect its identity. Now, none of the practical things in life, like having a pension, getting married, have kids, are impacted by this. And they need not be anyway, because we can live a normal life, but the inner life is what matters. Like the outer life is important because the body needs sustenance, it needs dignity, and it needs integrity. Whether it's the integrity in alignment with the ego's thought system or the integrity in alignment with liberation from fear is another matter. The former is much more common in our world. But I think when people read Lesson 80, because I've read that lesson when I'm embroiled in divorces, when I'm embroiled in serious health conditions, when I'm embroiled in all kinds of problems, and it's like, you know, probably the most annoying person you'll ever meet would be someone like you're in the middle of like, you're on the brink of death or something, and you need like a blood transfusion right away, and like someone comes up and says, oh, let us recognize that there are no problems. All your problems have been solved. That would be pure spite and lacking compassion completely. But what it's saying, it's speaking at a meta level. It's saying that from the perspective of a part of your mind that has transcended the illusion of time and space and the script of your journey through it, and gone to the end of that journey and looked back and seen the realization of the dawning of wisdom, you won't make a problem out of anything in your mind. You know, there's a saying that worry is a misuse of the imagination, and the neurotic mind is worry being a misuse of the imagination, and the victim mind, and we are often victims of other people's abuses of our integrity and our sovereignty. But that doesn't mean that we can't use time intelligently to transcend the attack thoughts of the psyche, both the attack thoughts and defense thoughts within our psyche and those outside. And that is psychotherapy. That is the essence of psychotherapy. It's aligning with the deeper wisdom of your inner peace and trust in how things are unfolding for your greatest growth, right? Because you can sit there and say, woe is me, and all these horrible things have happened to me, and they will be absolutely true at a relative level, but they are fuel. You know, Ramana Maharshi, this great sage from India, he says, usually, and even George Clooney, I've seen him say this, but usually, and most entrepreneurs say this, and it's a horrible truth. It's a horrible truth because it's not what you really want on a certain level. They say, you know, failure is the greatest teacher, because in failure you have to look at what is sorrowful. You have to look at this unconscious pain body that wants to dominate and define your psyche. And that's horrible. It brings up a lot of harrowing victim thoughts, right? And what you start to witness is, like, even if you're not a religious person, nothing to do with religion, this does have a reflection in the Yoga Sutras teaching, is that you think you're a horrible, dirty sinner, and you think the people out there are sinners. Now let's define sinner. The word sin comes from a phrase which means to miss the mark, like an archer who fires an arrow and misses the target. And it just means misperception. So you're seeing, supported by the evidence of your senses, all of these dark stories about the human condition. You know, look at Stalin, look at Hitler, look at Pol Pot, look at all the horrific things that child abusers and rapists do. The senses are reporting those. It's not something that hasn't happened. It's happened in time and space. But what you're being invited to do is to say, okay, yes, we agree. All of these problems are real. The world can be a wonderful place and a horrific place. But we're inviting you to take the hand of a different system of thought and say that maybe this whole projection of experience that you're going through could be different, and comes essentially in its deepest inflection from a place of fear. And looking at that fear for what it is the process of correcting it. Because if you look at a problem through the mind that is devoted to sustaining the idea problems are real in your head, then you'll have unending problems from that level of consciousness. But if you look at a problem from the sense of, oh, like a mother looks at a toddler who's just, rolled over in its own shit while she was outside of the room, because she didn't change the diaper fast enough or something, she can look at her own errors and the baby's errors from a sense of, oh, well, that was an innocent error. The phone rang, I had to go and take it, or I had to switch something off on the hob in the kitchen. And even when people do things that are horribly spiteful and mean, they come from this fearful state, you can start to see, well, they've lost relationship with the innocence inside them. They've lost relationship with this yearning for healing. And in my life, I was very much drawn to a scientific path, and then that was the good boy that I wanted to be, and then I started to see that, science is based on open-mindedness. But what the big breakthrough of sort of quantum physics brought us to was this understanding that the observer influences what's observed. And so when you take that to metaphysics and philosophy and psychotherapy, you start to realize that what we project through our thought system onto perception influences our experience of perception. And so, I think the hardest experiences in our life kind of testify and report back and affirm our biases, that there's a lot of malicious prejudice in the world. And of course there is, because the ego thrives on that. But the more we start to see it as originating from a fearful thought, a set of misperceptions, the more we can open that crack. There's a Leonard Cohen's line, there's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in. The more we can sort of wake up to this idea that we're all innocent, and that the projection of differences, the projection of fear, the projection of value systems that involve preferential dialogues in our minds, hierarchies of goodness, the more we are moving away on a certain level. I mean, it's natural to choose your mate, that's a preferential system, but on a certain level beyond those sort of practical limited things, if we aren't using those relationships as a mirror to transcend our fears, we're just getting trapped in our fears. And that's not recognizing that the problems we have been solved. That's affirming the problems that we have been solved. Now, that doesn't mean you discount the problems. You have to deal with the problems in the world. You have to handle your debts. You have to handle your, violations of integrity, the violations of virtue. That's a growing concern for a person that's interested in truth, because If you can't live up to your virtue, inner virtue, not this toxic use of virtue, which is called virtue signaling. Oh, I'm better than you, right? But this deeper virtue of like, I have to hold myself accountable. That's my number one job. Then what you're going to find is that you're going to get embroiled in the ego's philosophy, which justifies attack thoughts. And where there's attack thoughts, there's defenses, and then there's endless conflict. And Krishnamurti said conflict is stupid. And so where does conflict start? It doesn't start on the battlefield out there. It doesn't start in the classroom when people are fighting. These things happen. They will continue to happen in your life. But it starts in you ending the attack and defense thoughts inside you. And so saying, I am going to condemn you, right? Someone murders your child. I mean, no sane human, in inverted commas, is going to see them healed, right? But the only way that they can see their own healing come about is to deal with that immense tendency, natural tendency to project hatred onto that person and all these dark thoughts, which become a prison and trap us from peace, right? So it's a very, very difficult path to recognize this simple truth that let me recognize all my problems have been solved. It's against the thought system of the world. It's swimming upstream relative to the thought system of the world, because the thought system of the world is about eat or be eaten, attack or be or defend, hot and cold. It's all these opposites. But out beyond, you know, the fearful mind, like when Parsival gets to the Grail Castle and succeeds in the challenges that he has hidden in his story, which we all do, you know, two angels that transcend the opposites descend from heaven. There's a symbolism there, because this state of heaven is a state within us, and it has no hell in it, right? Earth is full of heaven and hell. There's these beautiful places and these atrocious places, you know, places full of like uranium poisoning that just will kill all life, and then places just with stupendous natural beauty. But if you look at the evolutionary biology in those places of stupendous natural beauty, like the rainforest, they're all competing at this ego level to outdo the other, to win in the race of evolution. And that's the genetic story, that's the ego story. But into that story can come a thought system that is transcendent, that is not in this battleground. And yeah, I mean, Buddha, there's a story of the Buddha in one of his incarnations. He was a rabbit and he saw a lion or a tiger, I think, that was hungry, and he ran as fast as he could into the jaws. It was so emaciated that the lion couldn't hunt anymore, and he ran into the jaws of this lion so he could live, you know. And that's the selfless state that I'm not advocating you you give up to dictators, you know. It's perfectly reasonable to stand your ground when people abuse you in a relative way, but at the absolute level within the mind, if you're using that movement where there's abuse that's happened to you to support the argument that you're a victim of the world you see at a psychological level, which means you're not healing trauma, you can handle the effects of abuse in the world with a lawsuit or whatever that's needed, or writing an article about the abuse so people can hear about it and it can be exposed, because that's bringing it up to the light. You might be crucified for that, but the deeper work here is to let me recognize that my problems have been solved, that I have bought into a thought system which deprives me of the fearless state that is my natural nature, right? And this teaching, lesson 80 in the Course in Miracles, I've often looked at that and thought, God, you know. And really, once you start to see what the Course in Miracles is, it's like a text, a workbook, a pamphlet on prayer, a pamphlet on psychotherapy. It's almost like you could condense it to Ramana Maharshi's question, who am I? Because it's just different takes, like photographic or video takes on the same voice that's talking, you know. Like the voice is almost silent. It's silent, really. It's just this knowing. But to handle the labyrinth of perception, you have to walk around the problem and say, my meaningless thoughts are showing me a meaningless world. I'm never upset for the reason I think. My way of seeing is a form of vengeance. I can give up the pain I'm experiencing when I drop my attack and defense thoughts. In my defenselessness, my safety lies. I am spirit. Let me recognize that my problems have been solved. And continuously it is sort of urging that it says choose once again, right? Because it tends to be that the ego will run in with its reactive mind. And then I used to have a landlord in India, and he would I would say, let's discuss this issue, and like it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon and I want to meet him at 5, and he said, let's do it in the morning, and he'd sleep on it. But there was a sort of maturity by metaphor there, in that, like, ego wants to rush in and have retribution. It wants to attack and undermine and defend. And sometimes it's wise to tell the story so that those that are attacking and defending can see what's talking in you, so that you can handle their disturbed minds, the weight of that pained ignorance, right? Because liberating others is not your job, but speaking your truth is. And sort of choose once again means that automatically, without even thinking, because it's so programmed into us, the ego assesses a situation. That's the judgments and the attack thoughts and the defense thoughts, and we get very hurt and very upset. But with mind training, you can sort of like, no, I'm not going to do it at 5. I'm not going to run into this thing. I'm going to sit with it and sleep on it, and I'm going to start to listen to a different order of consciousness. And that's what the Course in Miracles calls the Holy Spirit. And it also talks about guilt, right? So my guilt is that I think that I killed God, or I think that I destroyed my essence. I love Ramana Maharshi because there's no God in that. He just says there's only the self, right? So when the ego dies, it's just the self. So there's no like my God, my Christian God, or my Hindu God vying for superiority, or even the God of atheism, because that is a God. It's like binary 0 and 1, because Jesus and God are like 1, and then binary is 0. Like the atheism is 0, because there's like, it's still a state, it's still an authority figure that's ruling over your mind. But the thought system that transcends all of these, authority models is the thought system that says beyond fear there's rightness, and with rightness comes peace, and with peace is the reflection of the self, which transcends these separate identities like the Holy Spirit, the Son, and God, and all those things, and just is the melting point of unity, where you're no longer a separate entity, and fear is not your lens, whether it's one of those 9 or 10 misperceptions or whatever. But it's just like you start to climb the ladder out of the dungeon of fear that you're clothed in. And people say, oh, babies are born innocent. Well, they're not. They're born with vasanas, as the Indians say. They're born with these attributes. Every parent says, you just don't know what's coming out. 6 years in, you've got this person that has its own personality, and of course it's influenced by the environment, but it has these vasanas, which are the impressions of past behaviors. Whether you believe in reincarnation or not, you can't deny that different individuals have different propensities, and you can argue it's all genetic. But then even the guy that was behind genetic evangelism, Richard Dawkins, the guy I was rejected from by Oxford, he came up with the word meme. So there's also cultural impressions, and we are a bag. Our mind is a bag of these impressions, and until we filter through those that we identify with, that support pain and self-destructive behavior and destructive behavior towards others, we're caught in the trap of believing that the root of all our problems can't be solved. And then you go to the perception of the spaghetti as one dot, time and space limited to a finality, a unified form, a singularity. You then come to the awareness that, I can live my life above the battleground of the illusions that my ego is bound to, where everything that happens is supportive, by my interpretation or not, of my liberation from fear. That's the deep value of this lesson, lesson 80. Let me recognize that my problems have been solved.